Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the Page One podcast. I'm Tariq.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, their writing process, and how they got into the industry, and also try and get as many hints and tips on writing from them as possible. There's a good back catalogue of episodes there. It is episode 55, which I'm astonished at how many of these we've recorded. But do check that out if you haven't before. And since it's in the run-up to Christmas as we record this, of course, next week's episode would be due to come out on Christmas Day.
But there's no chance Marco's working on Christmas Day.
I was going to put you to work, Tariq, on Christmas Day.
The most horribly edited episode anyone had ever heard.
Well, actually, we do have a Christmas treat, though, next week. And I thought we would mention this at the start of the podcast before we get into this week's guest. Earlier in the year, we recorded a couple of video podcasts, which we're calling the Page One Sessions, with two of our previous guests together, having a more conversational chat about stuff. Although COVID features heavily in both of them. Warning.
In everything now.
Yes. So we already released one on YouTube, and I thought we would release the audio of that on Christmas Day as a podcast, so that if you haven't had a chance to watch it on YouTube, you can listen to it then. And that's a great chat that we had with Sarah Pimbra and Tim Lebin.
Yep.
And then, as another bonus,
there
will be a new Page One Sessions released. I say new, we did record it in the summer, so I feel bad to the guests that it's only being released now, but you know, they're getting a big premiere. It'll be released on New Year's Eve on YouTube, but also as a special podcast episode as well, a chat that we had with Laura Lamb and Adrian J. Walker, which again was great fun and really interesting to chat with both of them.
Yeah. And they're all kind of, a lot of them know each other, so it's a nice kind of relaxed chat. It's a lot of fun. There was even some drinking involved, I believe.
There was some drinking involved. But that's what to look out for in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be back in the new year, the first week of January, with a regular episode with another new guest. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because we've got a great episode this week as well.
We have an excellent episode this week. This week we are chatting with Jennie Fields, who is an American novelist, and her latest novel is Atomic Love, and it's a kind of romance spy thriller set during the development of the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project. And it's about a scientist who falls in love with another scientist and is then, well, I don't want to give too much away, but there's some spying involved. Yes,
indeed. And actually, it's, as we chat with Jennie, it's inspired by real life because a member of her family actually worked on the Manhattan Project, she found out. So, she's taken that on board. And we chat to her about how you write good historical fiction and the sort of research that's involved and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting episode. And she also had a career before writing, which was in marketing, and she actually came up with some famous marketing campaigns. Certainly in the US, the one I'm thinking of was definitely in the US. I'm not sure if it ever was in the UK.
Yeah, I didn't recognize it until I YouTubed it.
Yeah, but it's a campaign for a fast food outlet. We won't spoil it, but we have put the little advert that she wrote in the podcast, so you can enjoy that as well.
And of course, the answer to the final question that we ask her.
Well, we'll see. We don't want to spoil. No spoiler alerts, but you can tell because Tariq's excited, probably what she said. So we'll get on with the podcast, and we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat.
On with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying?
And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
I know you had a background in copywriting and marketing before you came into becoming a full-time author. Have you always been attracted to writing, though? Was that something that you always had an interest in since you were young?
Yes, I really wanted to be a writer from the time I was 6 years old. And I read a book and I loved it so much, I just imitated it and wrote my own version of the book. And I did go to university. I went to graduate school at the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is in America, very hard to get into, and a workshop that kind of launches a lot of writers. My classmates, two of them won Pulitzer Prizes.
Wow, cool.
So that was something that was important to my career, and I did that before I went into copywriting. But what I realized was I just knew I wasn't going to be able to make enough money to support a family or to have a normal life being a writer. And writing was important enough to me that I didn't want that pressure on it. So I got a career. I started a career in advertising, and I did that for 32 years.
Wow.
Which dates me. You're probably not even 32 years old.
In a few years' time, I will be, but yeah.
And so, when you were doing that work, obviously there is still a lot of writing in that work as well. But were you able to continue your own, fiction writing at the same time?
I was. So when I got out of graduate school and when I started being a copywriter, I was first publishing short stories, and I published a lot of short stories. And then I published my first novel many years ago while I was still a creative director in advertising. And I had a young daughter who I was a single mom to after she was 6 years old. I was her only parent at that time there. So it was... it was very challenging. My first novel was written mostly during lunchtime, and then things got so busy, they no longer gave us lunch. We just worked at our desk. So then I had to work so I would put her to bed. I would work out because you have to keep your body going too. And then I would write from 11:30 till about 1:30 in the morning. And then I'd get up at 6:10 to walk her to school and get her going. And so I didn't get a lot of sleep for a lot of years.
I suppose it's one of these things that I think you're so right that so many people start writing as they're working in something else, and it's a side career until they can make it their own career. And it's about finding that time and making the time and realizing if I want to do this, I'm going to need to carve out a few hours and just give up some sleep or whatever for it. And that's quite an important decision.
It's because you have to. I think in the end, there's just some sense of emptiness if you don't do it, and you miss that opportunity to find your best self, because writing is very much about reaching your subconscious. And at least for me, it is. And if I don't do that, I just feel like there's something terribly missing in my life, and I'm sad about it. So, and I do take breaks. I know there are writers who just write every single day, and I admire them. I'm not that kind of writer. Like between books, I do take breaks, but I'm starting a new book, and I realized, oh, that's why I do it. I really just did. It feels so good to be writing again,
And when you were working in a job, from one point of view, it can seem that if your day job is to do with writing, then that's only going to help you with your own writing. But this, I speak as someone that has a day job that is writing as well. Sometimes you can be, I find anyway, that you can be sort of dragged down by the paid writing, if you like, and it's difficult to get that spark going for your own writing. Did you find that as well?
I did on occasion, but I have to say, interestingly enough, I really found I used different parts of my brain. When I was doing my copywriting, and it was a really overwhelming job. There were times I was working 60 hours a week, but it's a more logical part of my brain. And I was really better at copywriting in the morning, and I'm really better at fiction writing in the late afternoon and evening. And that just proved to me it was a really, truly different part of my brain. And so while there were times the stress of the job really did suck away my energy, or having a young child at the time really did suck away my energy, I found that the writing paid me back sometimes. It actually energized me in a way that the paid writing didn't. Now, I mean, I'll have to say that sometimes when we had a great campaign and it was really successful, that paid me back in its own. But the writing that really mattered to me, when it was going well, and God knows it doesn't always go well, as you're well aware, I'm sure. But when it was going well, it really did pay me back.
But you did work on some fairly big ad campaigns. I was having a look at your website, and it was the menu chant, and I don't think this is something that ever aired in the UK, but I found it on YouTube, and is it the one that's kind of like a rap? They sing a rap at the menu.
Yeah.
This is for McDonald's,
Sorry, for McDonald's,
Hi, may I take your order, please?
Big Mac, McDLT, a quarter pounder with some cheese, filet of fish, a hamburger, a cheeseburger, a Happy Meal, McNuggets, tasty golden french fries, regular and larger sizes, salad, chef, a garden, or a chicken salad, oriental, big breakfast, a McMuffin, hot cakes and sausages, maybe biscuits, bacon, egg and cheese and sausage, Danish hash brown, 2 and 4 dessert, hot apple pies and sundaes, 3 varieties of soft serve cones, 3 kinds of shakes and chocolatey chip cookies, and to drink a Coca-Cola, Diet Coke, and orange drink is right, and coffee, decaf, 2 a low-fat milk, also an orange juice. I love McDonald's, good time, great taste, and I get this all at one place.
Would you like that to go?
So did you write the whole rap?
I wrote that long before rap existed, but it was really, really popular. I wrote a lot of jingles for a while because I also write music. So that was another thing that I did. My job was really entertaining, and I did get to travel all over the world. I mean, I've been down under like 7 times because of my job, for a month at a time. Sometimes I've done a lot of European shoots. I've shot in, remote villages in Alaska, where we were living in a cabin with our client for So, I mean, it was good for me as a writer because I got to see and do things I wouldn't necessarily see and do, and couldn't afford to see and do. But when it comes to what really makes me happy, it's my own writing.
So you had the first book when you were still in that working in that area. How did that come about? Did you have to spend time finding an agent, or did that come quite easily? How did that come about?
Well, it's funny. I found an agent right after graduate school, and then the first novel that I wrote never got published. And so the novel that did get published, Lily Beach, was my first published novel, was years later. And I reached out to get an agent, And I actually got one fairly easily. I mean, having been at the Iowa Writers Workshop was a bit of a key to a door for me. And that really helped. And the fact that I'd published so many short stories, you know, you want to have some kind of resume at the time you're looking for an agent to make them pay attention. And those things helped. So I had an agent for the second book, and I was with her for 27 years, but I switched agents 2 years ago, and I have to say it's been just amazing. It was a really good thing that I did that.
We've chatted to a few folk who've done a similar switch, although not after that long with an agent, but I think it must be a really difficult thing to know when to leave someone behind, especially if you've been with them for that long as well. And what was it that made you think it's time for a bit of a change here?
Well, you know, one of my best friends is Ann Patchett. Do you know Ann Patchett?
Yeah.
And she lives down the street from me. We walk our dogs together every single night. So, you know, we talk about, you know, how's it going? And the weird thing about Ann is she's 10 years younger than I am. But we both went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. We both went to the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center, which is a place where they let you write for a year by the ocean. We both had the same agent for 20-something years. And I was getting very frustrated with the agent, and she got frustrated enough with the agent because the agent stopped being able to function properly. She wasn't reading. She wasn't getting things out. And Anne left her first. And then she just kept, you know, elbowing me in the ribs. You've got to get rid of her. You've got to find a better agent. You can do it. And so, you know, she was annoying me enough that I checked. And I did find an agent who's just been incredible. And this book has been a very different experience for me. And I mean, I love my agent for many years. It's really like a divorce when you leave an agent after that long.
And what was it that made you think, right, I'm now going to do this full time, and you know, I'm going to leave the advertising behind?
Right. So when I sold my last book, which was The Age of Desire, which was my fourth novel, I got a nice enough nut that I felt, you know, I had put a lot of money aside. I owned a brownstone in New York, which I thought I could sell. And let me explain what happened. So my husband and I met in college and had a romance. And then we didn't see each other for 25 years. And we got back together in 1999. And we commuted between New York and Nashville for 10 years.
Wow.
And during that time, 6 of those years, we were actually married and not living together. We were just commuting back and forth. And so when I sold The Age of Desire, I thought, you know what, I can now afford to like sell my brownstone in New York and move to Nashville. And I didn't know if I'd like it or not, but I just immediately loved it. And there's so many writers here. It's a huge writing community. And so, and Anne owns this store that is just a center for writers from all over the country to come.
Brilliant.
And so it's just turned out amazingly well for me.
Excellent.
Awesome. That's a fantastic story in its own right there. That's
yes.
That's the plot of a next novel. That's really cool.
It was actually in my third novel.
and when it came, so your first 4 books, you were still working for the ad agency before you left and launched your 5th one. And I mean, obviously you'd worked on a lot of campaigns, marketing campaigns. And did you use that yourself, or, you know, when you were launching your books and marketing your own books, or was that something you took a step back from and let the publishers do that stuff for you?
Well, it's, you know, these days, I think we're required to be good social media people. I don't think you can be a writer and not be part of it unless you're already very famous. So I am constantly doing social media. Sometimes I find it exhausting. I'd much rather be spending my time, you know, working on a new book. And I want to hide away in my little room, this little room, and work on my book. But I think you have to be out there with social media these days to get any attention, especially during a pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the big, you know, that was the wrench in the works, you know, who would have ever imagined such a thing could have happened? But
no, it's affected, and especially as as an author, we've had lots of people that, as yourself, launching books, and suddenly you can't do these things anymore because it's all been affected by it. So the importance of social media, as you say, grows even more at that point. So when you've got an idea for a book, what is your process? Do you spend a lot of time thinking about it, researching it, planning it, or do you sort of just take the idea and start exploring it in terms of writing immediately?
I am not one of those people who outlines for books ever. It's just not my style. What I try to do is understand my main characters first. Then I give them an insoluble problem to solve and I let them solve it. Because if I plot it all out, I'll just be bored to death. Mm-hmm. I would never want to know what's going to happen entirely. I might have some sense of where it's going, but I really don't know. Now, because my last 2 books have been set in other eras, I've had to do a lot of reading, a lot of research. And the research, it stimulates me, but I research first and I research during, because the only way I really understand where I'm going is to start writing. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a plot oriented writer, and I'm much more drawn to character development, and that's what really matters to me and excites me.
And is that first draft then almost a sort of exploration of these characters, as you say, and where the story's going? Does it end up quite a clean draft at the end, or does that first draft almost act as like, right, okay, here's the world, here are the characters, but now I'm going to hone it down into the story that I want to tell?
No, by the time I finish a full first draft, I've gotten definitely the bones of the plot in there as well. And the first draft is the hardest part. I mean, to have the clay in order to shape it, it really does take a lot of effort. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I really love rewriting. And I have to say, it's shocking, but I rewrote Atomic Love 10 times. And that sounds like a very round, estimate number. It's not. I literally wrote it 10 times. And I'm willing to do that because I'm very picky about not having excess, not having extra words, extra scenes. I want it as crisp, as smooth, as energetic as it can be. Mm-hmm. And so that's my method. I mean, I get it down, and it is a story. It is a book by the time I finish the first draft, but it gets much better as it goes along.
Well, then how do you know when you're finished, and how do you know when you get to draft 10 and I've got it now, it's ready to go? Or is there always that lingering doubt?
It's never finished. I could do that forever. I mean, and it's hard sometimes to leave my characters because I become very attached to them. Yeah. Maybe you agree with this in your writing. It's really hard to say goodbye to them when I finished a book. But, I just feel like this is as good as it could be. And if I have any advice for writers, it's to make your book so good to you, so bulletproof to you, that when people start sniping at it, which every book gets people who don't like it, you just can't please everybody. And that's hard for new writers, I think, that you'll be proud. And it's almost like a shield. I did the best I could do. Mm-hmm. And you have to feel that way about your book when you put it out in the world, because putting a book out in the world is a very scary proposition.
Yeah, I'm sure. And when you're doing it, you say you did 10 rewrites of it. Is that complete rewrites, or is it, revising? It's
significant enough rewrites, because I'm constantly revising. I mean, every single day I'm revising, but significant changes in something about the character, something about a specific character or a scene or a situation that I realize isn't working. I'm very careful about what I think works and doesn't work. And I have a certain level to which I need my writing to be at. So it's not about just the words. It's not just about cleaning it up. It's bigger than that.
Because that can sometimes be quite a difficult thing to do. Once you've written a whole draft of a novel, however long it is, 90,000 words or whatever, in your head, you've created this world, you've created these characters, to then revisit it and actually make quite significant changes to it can be quite difficult. Not from the point of view of even, I don't want to change that. It's more just switching it in your head and saying, right, no, actually, what happens if this happens instead, or this happens? Certainly, I've found that it can be. I find it difficult to see a different angle on things sometimes. How do you deal with that sort of thing?
I really like it.
Okay.
I mean, I really, you've always got the original. You can always go back to the original. You should always make a new clean draft when you're going to make a major change, so that you can say, well, that didn't work, because sometimes you have to go down a path that's going to lead to nowhere. But I find it very exciting, because if you have enough raw material that you care about, you want it to be good. And if you can make it better, I mean, how thrilling is that? So you've got to be brave. You got to kind of put that stick between your teeth and say, I'm going to get through this. And I find it very exciting. I love that part. The hardest part for me is getting down the original draft and understanding what it is I'm trying to say. Themes for me come out of my subconscious often. I don't even know that I'm laying down themes. And then by rereading it, I understand where I'm going, what's important to me in it. So,
I mean, a lot of the themes I think that run through your work is people finding their place in the world, or being dealt kind of personal blows and overcoming obstacles. And your latest book is Atomic Love, which is very much in that same mold. And it's about female. Well, actually, I was going to say what it's about, but perhaps I'll let you tell us what your latest book is about.
Well, my latest book is about a woman who was a nuclear physicist on the Manhattan Project, which was the original project which created the nuclear bomb. And she's the only woman working at the University of Chicago, where they created the first nuclear reaction, and the youngest woman on the team. And there was, in fact, a woman who was the youngest person on the team and the only woman. My character is not based on her, because I really cared not to be telling a tale of someone else's life. I did that in my last book, and I didn't want to be tied to that. But everything else about her, her age and her abilities and things like that, I did borrow from real life. And so this woman now, this woman at the time, she helped to create the nuclear bomb and then was devastated when it was dropped, which a lot of scientists were. A lot of scientists never believed it would be used. They thought they were doing it because the Germans were creating a nuclear bomb, and they didn't want to be killed by the Germans just because they had a better weapon than we did. So they thought it was a way to stop a worsening war. And then when it was dropped, they just, even Robert Oppenheimer, who was one of the fathers of the nuclear weapon, was devastated for the rest of his life, literally depressed about what had happened. So this woman's feeling this, and then she, not only that, but she loses her relationship with her lover, who is her colleague on the weapon. 5 years later, she's lost her job. He betrayed her and got her fired. She's working selling jewelry in a department store, and she's lost her career. She's lost her lover, and her identity, basically. And she is approached again by the man who betrayed her, wanting to explain what happened, and she doesn't want to see him. And then she's approached by the FBI, who says, "Please see him, because we think he's selling nuclear secrets to the Russians, and you're the one person who can find out what's going on." And so she's put in this situation where it's a pretty insoluble problem. As I said, I like to give my characters insoluble problems, to spy on her old lover, to go back into a relationship that is dangerous to her because she is vulnerable to this man, and to find out what's going on.
So
it's a terrific setup.
It is, and I'm just wondering what was the first spark of that idea? Because obviously there's a lot going on there. What was the first thing that drew you to that book?
A lot of elements came into play for me wanting to write this book. One was that my mother was a scientist in the 1940s, and she was really an important scientist. I never knew this as a child. I knew she'd been a scientist, but I never knew until recently how important her work was. She was doing cancer research, which apparently was referred to as late as the late 1960s, even though she did it in the 1940s.
Wow.
And when she married, she was pretty much required to give up her job. And it was something she regretted the rest of her life. And she would say to me constantly, whatever you do, don't give up your career. Always know what you can do, because she really lost what mattered to her. And I wanted to write about that. Also, her cousin worked on the Manhattan Project.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And, we don't know what she did because she was so sworn to secrecy that my mother didn't even know she worked on the Manhattan Project at the time. And she went to her grave with details. She just didn't want to talk about it at all. So that really intrigued me. The fact that silence was so enforced, it went to her grave with her. So that really drew me into the story. And the third thing was, just the idea that that era is fascinating to me. Everybody talks about World War II. But if you think about the 1950s, the war was over. Everybody was supposed to be happy. You always see the guy in the gray flannel suit and the woman carrying a tray of, martinis and saying, "Here, dear, you deserve this." And the kids are playing quietly in the background. And, the 2.5 kids. And, everybody's supposed to be so happy the war is over. But in fact, if you really examine it, a lot of men came home with terrible PTSD. A lot of the women had to give up jobs that actually meant something to them during the war. They were important to the war effort. They understood their identities changed because they had jobs they could never have had otherwise. And then they were told, okay, you can have dinner parties now and have children. And there was a lot of anger and upset and loneliness and sadness and with all plastered over with big smiles. And I thought that was a very important tale to tell because people aren't talking about that. So that era really fascinated me. And one more thing came into it, I have to say. I really wanted to write about two birds with broken wings who find each other and help each other heal. And that was a story that seemed important to me. I mean, everybody thinks love is like, oh, it just makes you happy. To be in love makes you happy. But in fact, I really think love is about healing the wounds from earlier. And that if you find the right person, they help you heal. And I wanted to tell that tale as well.
When you're writing something like that, that's, you've got all the kind of personal stuff that you want to put into it, and you've got all this historical stuff that runs alongside it. I'm assuming that it's the kind of thing that because I've definitely read things and something about the time or hasn't clicked right, and it takes you out of it, and it kind of ruins the whole experience of the book. And so getting that historical stuff is just as important as the personal stuff. And how much research do you do when you go into that sort of thing? Do you spend quite a lot of time reading about the era, what it was like for people working in that time?
I do read a lot about the era. One of the things that is my secret weapon is reading newspapers from that era.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea.
Because, it's amazing. It tells you about attitudes. It tells you what's being told to the populace. It tells you the price of bread. It tells you the clothing. All of that is just so useful. I also read women's magazines from the era because that tells you about attitudes of what you're expected to be. And, it's hilarious because after the war, everything is made out of bologna and ersatz foods. I mean, it's just horrifying. It's like bologna rarebit for your family. And, it's horrifying what people ate back then. Everything was canned. The only vegetables you ever got were canned vegetables, but it tells you just a lot about attitudes, a lot about, how people think they should live. The newspaper tells you, I think, more about how people are actually living. So those are really, really useful. Reading novels from the era is also particularly useful because it tells you about, the concerns of the era.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to be read. And then on top of that, I needed to read about nuclear weapons and how they were created. I needed to read about nuclear spies. There actually was a spy at the University of Chicago at the time the book takes place, and he never was caught.
Oh.
They found out he was there because they broke the Russian code. The Americans broke the Russian code, and they kept it a secret from the Russians for decades. And in 1995, they declassified that information, and it proved he was a spy. But they could not put him in jail without finding other clues to how he became what he became and how he did what he did. And they couldn't find them in time. And he went off to England, and he spent the rest of his life as a professor in England and was never jailed. So, I mean, those things were really fascinating and very important to tell the tale. So there's a lot of reading to be done. And I have to tell you, I'm not a good nonfiction reader. I really enjoy reading fiction. I don't really enjoy reading nonfiction unless it's super well written. So it's a challenge for me.
I mean, I definitely find that if I'm kind of like you, I struggle reading a lot of factual stuff if it's about a historical time. But I feel the books that I learned the most from are ones where they're written in that era, but they're not. You're kind of learning about that era as you go along, so that it's kind of historical stuff's incidental or it's part of the plot, and you don't even realize until the end. I've learned all about the Cold War because of this book that wasn't, I would never read about it otherwise, but it's a nice way to get to learn.
Right. Well, and the important part about being a writer of historical fiction is to not hit your readers over the head with the information. A bad historical novel will say, and here's everything I know about the atomic bomb, and they just drop it on you. That is not a good way. The characters need to understand it. It needs to be natural. It needs to be released in a way that you would release the facts of our pandemic, as example. And, you incorporate them into the characters, into what they do, that historical information. You have to be really careful not to drop it on your readers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always a big problem. That you don't want just a sort of exposition dump in a book. There's nothing worse to pull you out of it, really.
Yeah.
And
it'll put you to sleep for one.
Yeah, exactly. And the book itself has, just going back to the pandemic, I think it's just launched in September. Is that right? And what happened given the situation we're in? How did that go?
Well, it's been a challenge. And, my publisher is very, very behind it. So they're really hoping that the paperback will be the bigger story. But we did get a wonderful event with Waterstones, and we've done a lot of podcasts, and we're just chugging along. It's done well in the US because it was chosen as a book of the month, which is a very popular club among particularly young women readers. And, we sold tens of thousands of copies of the hardback that way, which was amazing. I never imagined such a thing. And in the UK, it's going to be a challenge. But, Michael Joseph has just been wonderful to me. And, they really believe in the book. And it's also going to come out in 8 languages. So that's exciting. And I've been in touch with some of the translators asking me questions, which is always fun.
I suppose whenever you launch a book, there's always, more so than ever, as time goes on, that kind of reliance on online, social media, blogs, podcasts. And I'd imagine now with the pandemic, more than ever, there's it's pretty much entirely online. And it must be forcing people to rethink how book launches work, and not just book launches, but any kind of media launch. How do you get that out there without physically going to bookshops and reading it to people and signing copies and stuff?
Yeah, so it's really it's a very different way of thinking about it. I mean, I've always gone on book tours.
Mhm.
Big book tours were planned for this book. I was going to come to the UK, which of course made me very happy because my daughter lives there and I love seeing her. But, you know, I'm hoping that'll still happen for the paperback. There's no way to know exactly when it will come out. But I will tell you an interesting silver lining to this. And that is that a lot of the events that I have done online, because they get put into, you know, archives, they get looked at much more. I mean, an event I did with Ann Patchett for Parnassus Books is her bookstore, has gotten 1,600 views. I mean,
Wow.
you know, it's just amazing. I would never get that many people into a bookstore. So there are, you know, there are positives to it.
Yeah.
And people can, you know, watch events all over the country if they want to. So that's a positive. And it makes me wonder what's going to happen to, you know, book tours in the future. I mean, I'm sure there will always be book tours, but probably less of them, I'm thinking.
Well, even with like the Edinburgh International Book Festival, obviously was cancelled, but it was all online. And, you know, I think they also had a massive surge in people seeing it and stuff, because you have that opportunity. You don't, you know, if you can't go to an event live, then you can always catch up with it recorded and things like that. So there, as you say, silver linings to fairly dark clouds.
Right.
And in terms of your own writing and creativity, have you found, you know, has everything that's been going on made it more difficult to write, or have you been able just to bed in and continue your own writing?
Yes. Yes, it has definitely made it more difficult. I think, you know, here in America, we're not just dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with a political scourge. And it's been very hard for people who are thinking, caring humans to go forward. Our election is on our minds every single day here. And I know it affects the whole world. I mean, I have friends in Australia writing me about it, so I know everybody's wondering what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, we all are getting our hopes up, which makes me nervous because we've been knocked before when our hopes are up. So, I'm very distracted. I'm much more distracted than usual, and I really have to be tough on myself to get myself to write. When I do get myself to write, I'm much happier. So I have to remind myself that's important. You know, Ann Patchett said, and I really think this is a great quote because it so speaks to me. We were walking our dogs one night, and she said, you know, those times when you just have the muse come to you and you just can't stop writing and it's just fantastic. Yeah, of course, I know those times. And then she goes, and you know those times when you just sit down and you feel like an idiot and you can't get anything down and you're just struggling, but you still work and you still work and you still work. And, you know, you're going to rewrite it. You're going to fix it. And then you're done with the book and you can't remember which is which. And that's so true because, you know, sometimes the perspiration parts instead of the inspiration parts are just as good in the end when you work on them. And so you just have to keep working.
Yeah, I think
that's absolutely true. There's definitely times I've written stuff, and as you say, every word's a slog, and you think this is just absolute garbage. And the next day you go back and you look at it and you think, that's not half bad, to be honest. It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Yes, I just leave it.
Exactly. And if it is half bad, you can fix the half that is
exactly.
bad.
Yeah. It's half a lot better than I thought it was.
Yeah. So I know Atomic Love is just out, but you know, have you been working on your next book? Is that, you know, have you got a deal where that will be out next year at about around the same time, or?
No, I will not do 2 book deals. I did that one time, and it's just not good. And I'll tell you why. Because the editor you adore who picked you up is very likely to go to another house and orphan you, and then you're stuck and you're lonely and afraid. You know, I don't want to go through that again. I like to write 1 book at a time. And however long it takes for me, I don't really want that kind of pressure. And so my next book will come when it comes. I'm working on it now. I'm trying to understand exactly what it is. It's always very amorphous in the beginning.
Yep.
Excellent.
It's quite an exciting time, though. I think we were chatting with someone the other day there who kind of said that the perfect book is when it's in your head still, and it's and as soon as you try and put it on the page, that's when it starts to kind of the reality of trying to make that actually work starts to sink in. But I think the planning when it's all in this kind of nebulous possibilities is always quite a nice part of the process.
I 100% agree with you. And, it's true that, people come up to writers and they'll say, I have such a great story. You should do it. You could write it and it would be great. It's like, it's always great in your head. It's not always so great when you get it down. And, in fact, it's never great when you get it down at first.
Yeah.
There are parts you're going to go, ooh, that was good. But there's going to be a lot of parts that are going to be just horrifying. And, you're right. It's always terrific when you're thinking it up.
Yeah.
But,
and then by the time it is ready and you've done your drafts, it's probably changed so much from what it was when you first started that the idea is completely different. And, it's such a changing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ever changing. It's ever changing 10 drafts in too.
Exactly.
What was the last book that you read?
I always say that I have book amnesia because I have a really hard time telling you what the last book I read was. I do know what the last book I read was, and it is very popular in the US, and I really didn't like it at all. And so I'm not going to name it.
Okay.
That's fair.
It is historic fiction, and I just kept slapping my head because it was so bad. And I don't, it's very confusing what is popular, what isn't popular, why it's popular. And I'm not going to name names.
Okay, no, that's
fair
fine.
enough. Fair enough. No, I've definitely read stuff and you think, I don't understand why this is so big, but it's just not clicking for me at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt the writer's hand way too much. And I don't want to ever feel the writer's hand. I want to fall into the story and believe it really happened.
Yeah. What about the last film you watched? Was that any better?
What was the last film I watched? Oh, film, do we watch film? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that I can answer. Hang on a minute. It was an old movie and I'm thinking it was a Hitchcock, but I don't really remember what it was. I could watch Alfred Hitchcock. I really love him.
Yeah, it was great.
We watched Psycho I'd say years and years ago, but we watched it recently for the first time in ages, and I was amazed how well it still holds up for being 60 years old or so. It's genuinely still a terrific movie. Whereas a lot of films don't last that long, but his stuff definitely does.
It's true. I'll tell you what else is a terrific movie, and it's a writer's movie.
Okay.
Rear Window.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you haven't seen Rear Window, you have to see it, or if you haven't seen it in a long time, you have to see it again because it's about people watching other people. So it is all about the peeping Tom quality of being a writer and wanting to know what's going on behind those windows.
Yep.
And isn't that what we do every single day as writers?
Yeah.
We quietly watch and take notes, and we try to figure out what's going on back there. What's the mystery? Everyone has secrets, and don't we all want to know what those secrets are?
Absolutely. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's so true.
It is the ultimate writer's movie, Rear Window. I could see that 1,000 times. I'd never be tired of it.
Yeah, it's great actually. I've not seen it for a few years though. But
no, neither have I.
And another one in the same theme. What is the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
The last TV show I watched was Shetland.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
And I love all British mysteries, and I really love Shetland. And I've been to Shetland. My daughter and I went to Shetland and spent a week there. I love going to Scottish Isles. I've also been to the Orkneys, and I've been to Mull, and I just love going to the farthest reaches of places. So Shetland really speaks to me. I love everything about it.
It's one of these shows though that it's like there's so many murders happening on such a small place. And
I know we always joke about the danger of small English villages.
Yeah, exactly.
Midsummer Murders, exactly. Why would you ever live there?
Yeah. And if you're not murdered, the person next door is going to be murdered.
Yeah.
Watching out the window and have all the clues. So
That's so true. And the very, very last thing we do is a quick fire either or. So there's not meant to be any correct answer, but there might well be one or two. But TV or cinema?
These days, TV.
Fair enough.
A fancy restaurant or a takeout?
Well, I really would much rather go to a fancy restaurant, but not during the pandemic.
And last one, I'll go for real book or ebook.
Okay, I'm going to be very unpopular as an author for saying this, but I love ebooks.
Tariq is
I
so happy.
really love ebooks because, I love looking at a book. I love seeing the beauty of books. But when you're reading an ebook, you fall into it and you don't even think about the physicality of the book anymore. And I have to say, I really love that. I also love when I'm done, if I think, I love this author, I have to read the 8 other books this author has read. I can have it that night. So, I know I'll be very unpopular for saying.
Listen, I am 100% behind you in this. I'm a massive ebook fan for all those reasons you say: lightweight, travel with it easy, instant books on your bookshelf straight away. Yep. I'm glad to find a kindred spirit who also agrees with me on this. It's good.
It's rare though. I think we're a silent minority or possibly majority.
I say definitely majority, but definitely silent.
Well, in terms of guests on the podcast, it's the minority, definitely.
We're creeping up though. There
have been a few
6 of us now, I think, out of 40 or 2. I think that's us up to 5 now, Marco. Must be getting a bit worried over there in the ivory tower.
I think you're doing yourself down. I think you must have at least 6 people that preferred ebooks out of 55.
It's a silent majority, I believe.
I don't think you know what a majority is. But no, I thought that was a great chat with Jennie. And as I said at the start, really interesting to hear how you craft convincing historical fiction, and because there must be a danger when you're researching something like that you are desperate to put all your research that you found into the novel in a sort of expository way that ruins the whole flow of the novel and kind of takes you out of it.
I thought reading a newspaper or a magazine from the time, very interesting method. I'd never thought of doing that, but it's a great way to capture the kind of writing style or what was going on at the time, what was popular, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's really, really smart.
Just sort of cultural attitudes and everything. Yeah, it's a very clever idea. So I may steal that myself if I decide to go down that route. But thanks very much to Jennie for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate her taking the time. And if you haven't checked out Atomic Love, it is available in the UK. So you can get that. We'll put a link to be able to buy it on the podcast description and on the website.
Absolutely. And next week, of course, as Marco said at the start of the episode, there is no regularly scheduled podcast. We are doing the Page One Sessions specials, audio format and video format for the new episode, which will be out New Year's Eve. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another brand spanking new episode for you all to enjoy.
We will. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed the episode, please do take a couple of seconds to rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you do. That would be the best Christmas present you can give us.
Mark has been begging for this all year.
Exactly.
He wants the puppy.
So just, a little 5-star review there. That would be awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below. Hit that thumbs up button.
And be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here. And our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.